Good evening, guys, and welcome to another big episode of Triggered. Thank you guys for tuning in. As always, we really appreciate it, but we have a huge show today. We're going to be joined by Kash Patel. He's a perfect guest for what we're going to be discussing, which is obviously the Trump indictment. This is my first time talking about it live. We're going to get into all the details, but Kash is the perfect guest as we're faced with yet another deep state hoax targeting my father, President Donald Trump. Kash, as you remember, is a leading and was a leading warrior against the Russia collusion hoax, someone who literally prosecuted that case while working with Devin Nunes in Congress. He's also, again, a former chief of staff of the Defense Department, a deputy director of national intelligence, so he understands how that deep state machine works. He has a new book coming out called Government Gangsters, which he had to actually sue the Biden administration to be able to get it published. So he has the details, and he can expose all of the dirty tricks. He also worked as a criminal defense attorney in Miami. And as you guys know, this case is being prosecuted in the courthouse down in Miami. You've probably seen the news clips of my father flying in today for that indictment tomorrow. So this is someone who understands how the deep state side of it works, how the criminal prosecution side of it works. He knows the players in the Miami courthouse, and we'll talk about the details of that history of the players involved because, man, let's just say there's a lot of shadiness, but that shouldn't surprise anyone at this point. So, guys, make sure you're liking and subscribing to this channel so that you never actually miss an episode, so that you can hear it here first, so you don't have to deal with the censorship that, unfortunately, we're faced with on all of these other platforms. So Kash will be coming up here shortly, but first, let's just unpack everything that you need to know about this indictment. Plus, we also have some new and big breaking news from Senator Chuck Grassley on the Biden bribery scandal, folks. Let's just say there seems to be tapes, and if we didn't live in a banana republic, that would be a big deal, you'd think, but, you know, again, there seems to be, let's just say, a not-so-equal enforcement of the laws, depending on whether you're a Democrat or if you're just like one of us, someone outside of that protected class. So, first off, guys, this indictment over documents is just another blatant election interference scheme designed to rig the outcome. Okay? That's what it is. And if anyone thinks it's anything else, you haven't been watching for, let's just say, the last 6 years or so. And it's absolutely disgraceful for anyone who cares about justice and the supposed equal justice under our laws. Again, anyone who's been watching understands that that's not the case either, but hopefully one day it will be extreme enough that people would show the outrage that they should, that some of the other, say, presidential contenders would be outraged rather than saying, oh, well, as long as it's against Trump, because one day it's going to be against them. Let's see. With the new fraudulent indictment, this shares a key quality to the Russia collusion hoax, and that is special counsel Jack Smith, a political hack just like Robert Mueller. Remember the Mueller report, and it was going to be this stuff, and then you see the team of henchmen, etc. He actually wants to jail my father for literally 450 years. Right, just so we're clear, 450 years. 4.5 centuries. Just so you understand exactly what we're dealing with. Okay? Another example, Jack Smith has a history of targeting conservatives. He was involved in the Obama administration's IRS scandal that targeted conservative nonprofit groups. Now, again, if we had a real media, if we had people other than simply propagandists for the Democrat regime, those things would be really big deals, but we don't. Watch what Jim Jordan has to say about all this.
This just underscores how political this whole thing is. Jack Smith, I mean, you know how political it is when they selected Jack Smith as a special counsel. I actually said in a deposition with Jack Smith, we deposed him on May 29th, 2014, because he was looking to prosecute people who were targeted by Obama's IRS, people Lois Lerner was going after.
Sir,
we actually had to depose Jack Smith.
You can keep talking about this. I want to talk about the substance of...
And that's not all, guys. This guy even prosecuted Republican presidential contenders before. He charged former Virginia Governor Bob McDonnell in 2014 with federal corruption charges. The case was later overturned 8-0. 8-0. I guess someone was absent that day, but 8-0 by the Supreme Court. Okay? So if you don't think this guy had his cut and dry case that was overturned 8-0 by the Supreme Court, this guy was also a war crimes prosecutor for Kosovo at The Hague, where he was also the subject of controversy. Out of curiosity, why was he chosen to be the special counsel for this documents case? It's a documents case. They chose a war crimes prosecutor to do this? I mean, that sort of sounds just like, I don't know, using the FBI's hostage rescue team to serve a search warrant? Do you think that maybe the Democrats, the Biden regime, the DOJ controlled by that administration, do you think maybe they're using the extremes here to prosecute Trump, not necessarily going by the norms? Do you think they're trying to send a message? Do you think they've weaponized every possible institution in our government to go after their political enemies? Guys, and here's the big irony of all of this. The Espionage Act, which they're using to prosecute this crime, allegedly, dates back to 1917, when Woodrow Wilson was president. And for decades, the left has attacked the law for being vague, overbroad, and for being used to silence political dissidents. Think about this, folks. They're absolutely right. It's the one time I actually agree with the left on anything, because that's exactly what's going on here. They're using this to silence the political opposition. People who would question both the Uniparty, the radical left, and the people who would actually be capable of making change in Washington, D.C. My father. It's not just that Jack Smith is a political hack, but like Mueller, his deputies are also hatchet men. The prosecutor leading the case in Miami is a woman named Karen Gilbert. In 2009, Gilbert had to retire from her position at the DOJ after a federal judge reprimanded her for misconduct. Think about this, folks. The person they choose is someone that got reprimanded by a federal judge for misconduct. Seems like the perfect person to put in there. Someone who's already been reprimanded, someone who clearly has no moral compass and will do whatever it takes to get the Democrats' political enemies. She led a scheme to secretly record the defense counsel in a case. I'm sure Trump will get a fair shot here, folks. I'm sure that will be normal. Kash Patel, who's our guest, will be on here shortly, worked as a defense attorney in Miami at the time, and he'll have a lot more coming up to say about this. Here he is talking about her reputation. Check out what Kash has to say.
Bringing this case. And let me give you an example. The lead prosecutor, Karen Gilbert, who is likely to be the trial attorney in the Southern District of Florida in 2009, was so reprimanded in a narcotics trafficking case that she had to retire from her position. And years later, she was promoted upwards at the DOJ. And now you find, and don't believe me, go to the Ali Shagan case from 2009 and Judge Gold in the Federal District of the Southern District of Florida and look up Karen Gilbert. She is the Weissman to Jack Smith, and she has been pulling the reins on this investigation. And she was called one of the most corrupt people to, guess what? She wiretapped the defense lawyer's investigative office to eavesdrop on the conversation between the defense attorney and the investigator. And before she got slapped by the courts, she resigned from her position. This person is leading this prosecution.
Did you hear that, folks? Did you hear that? I mean, this is like, that's like Law 101, Morality and Decency 101. And clearly, she doesn't have either. But that's perfect, because that's exactly what the Democrats will do. They don't care about the law. They don't care about decency. They care about winning. And when you have big tech, when you have the mainstream media, when you have the vast majority of big social doing your bidding, they'll turn a blind eye to anything as long as they get the results that they want. Okay? The people that have been screaming about democracy and all that for the last few years are strangely quiet, because they too are complicit and want a result. They don't care about the law. They don't care about decency, morality, or such. They just want to get Trump so they can go about doing things the way they've done it in Washington forever. So it shouldn't come as a surprise to anyone that a team of dishonest attorneys like this would bring forth a bogus prosecution. Smith is actually trying to claim that there is one set of laws in America that everyone follows. He said that in his press conference on Friday, where he was like shaking behind the podium for some reason. Right? Maybe he was nervous. Maybe it was rage because he hates Trump that much. We know his wife certainly doesn't like Trump, but we'll get into that too probably in a little bit, given some of the facts set there. He knows this case is going to fall apart. He's also a liar. A short history lesson will show that there's a set of laws for liberal Democrats and their allies. And then there are laws for everyone else. For example, after Bill Clinton left the White House, he kept White House audio tapes with him. He brought them to his house and he stored them in his sock drawer. These tapes included national security information, such as calls with world leaders, military briefings. Judicial Watch sued to obtain those recordings, and a judge shot them down by saying they are now Bill Clinton's personal property, not the government's. That's strange. I wonder why that rule would apply to Bill Clinton, but not Trump. It's very odd. The federal judge, Amy Berman Jackson, wrote in her 2012 ruling that the president enjoys unconstrained authority to make decisions regarding the disposal of documents. That's a quote, guys. Unconstrained authority to make decisions regarding the disposal of documents. This is due to the Presidential Records Act, which gives presidents the ability to keep custody of documents whether they are marked classified or not. The 2012 ruling noted, quote, the president is completely entrusted with the management and even the disposal of presidential records during his time in office, end quote. In other words, folks, President Trump didn't do anything wrong. Watch what Greg Jarrett has to say about it here.
Presidential Records Act, a civil statute, gave Trump the right under the law to maintain custody and control of papers, whether they're classified or not, Sean. It's a civil, not criminal statute. Because it's a specific statute, it takes precedence over general statutes. And indeed, for more than a decade, the Department of Justice agreed with that. It became their own established standard. They even argued it in federal court in the Bill Clinton case, stating emphatically that Clinton was entitled to keep whatever he wanted after leaving office, whether it was classified or not. So that's Trump's main defense. And the judge in the case endorsed it. The judge ruled the National Archives doesn't have authority to decide presidential records, and that seizing them from a former president is unfounded and contrary to the law. So Trump relied on that standard. That should be his defense.
Seems pretty cut and dry, folks, again, but as we've seen, there's a standard for Trump, There's a standard for MAGA, and there's a standard for everyone else. And especially if you're a liberal Democrat, there's no standard at all, it seems. The documents mentioned in the indictment were taken from the White House while my father was still president. He doesn't need permission from some bureaucrat to keep presidential records. There's precedent for that. That's the Bill Clinton case. Furthermore, the president is the original classification authority. Okay, that's a quote, and holds the ultimate authority to classify and declassify information. Okay, take a look at this legal breakdown from legal scholar Mike Davis. Mike's been on the show. He gets it. He's clerked for Supreme Court justices, and he understands exactly what's going on. But again, just because there's precedent, just because there's law, just because there are rules, doesn't mean that those laws and rules and precedent will apply to someone that the uni party in Washington, D.C. doesn't like. Check out what Mike has to say here.
That he is going to prevail? Is it simply Judge Cannon overseeing the initial early stages? Does President Trump have a very compelling argument? Is the burden of proof on the government here? Break down why you are optimistic regarding this.
I'm optimistic Trump will prevail because the law is on his side. The Biden Justice Department has intentionally misled federal courts. They tried to do it with Judge Cannon. She was smarter than that. They did it with the 11th Circuit, and they were weak and cowed. But the Presidential Records Act controls a former president's handling of his presidential records. It does not matter whether they're classified or not. These records were very secure in the office of former president for 18 months after Trump left office. They began leaking when Biden had his Justice Department raid Trump and started leaking these documents.
Listen, everything Mike says there is 100% accurate, except for the fact that he thinks Trump's going to get away with it because the law is on his side, because we've seen that doesn't matter. When you're a Democrat, it doesn't matter. How many countless examples do we have to have of just that? Remember, it's sort of like the Hunter Biden versus Don Jr. scandal. I understand. I'm not the upstanding citizen that Hunter Biden is, but, in all fairness, I've done 50 hours of testimony before Congress for treason, a crime punishable by death, and yet a guy on China's payroll, on Russia's payroll, on Ukraine's payroll, money laundering for Russian oligarchs, no-show jobs in Ukraine, only places where his father had control, set up shell entities within seconds of that happening, never conducted business of the sort prior, can make millions, and no one even wants to know. And yet I could do testimony for treason, a crime punishable by death. So let's not pretend that having the law on your side actually matters in America in 2023, because it doesn't. It should. That's why we keep fighting. But our system right now is bullshit. Let's just say, what would be illegal, folks, would, for example, be, say, if a senator who later became vice president was found to have held onto classified documents. That would be Joe Biden. Joe Biden had top secret documents at his Chinese heavily funded think tank. He also had classified documents in his personal garage where he parks his Corvette. Now, that's, I'm sure, much more secure than a vault at Mar-a-Lago guarded by the United States Secret Service. But, those are details that really don't matter because Orange Man bad. The Presidential Record Act does not apply to vice presidents or senators. And yet, nothing will happen from that. We all know that. Joe Biden's not allowed to have taken those documents at home with him in the first place. We've seen it. There's a special counsel allegedly investigating this case. Robert Hur, Democrat fanboy. But does anyone really have any confidence whatsoever that the integrity of that investigation has any integrity at this point? Heck, it's been years and there's no charges for Hunter. They'll slow roll it, they'll pretend, they'll do just enough to make it seem like they're doing something, but they certainly aren't putting a war crimes prosecutor on it. They're certainly not having corrupted officials prosecute the case. No. They want to find the worst of the worst, the biggest unscrupulous scumbags to go after Trump because they only care about getting him. And get this, according to Senator Chuck Grassley, just now, just today, like an hour ago I saw this, the foreign national at the center of the growing Biden bribery scandal, allegedly, has audio tapes between him, Joe, and Hunter. Will the special counsel be investigating that? Will they bring in a war crimes prosecutor? Because I'm told that that would actually be treasonous. That would actually merit something like what they've tried to do to me, my family, and most importantly, my father for the last 7 years. This is a huge development. If we didn't live in a banana republic, and if we actually had an honest press that was more than just the marketing department for the radical left, that would actually be a big deal. And yet, it probably won't be. And the liberals who shout that conservatives are hypocrites for wanting Hillary Clinton to be imprisoned for her possession of classified documents on a private email server are revealing their ignorance. Secretaries of state do not enjoy the powers that presidents do. And I understand it's Hillary, so she's above the law, but that's still a fact. They can't declassify or classify anything at all. They certainly can't do it at will, and the Presidential Records Act does not apply to them. Here's Jim Jordan explaining just that.
I'll read something that you said about Hillary Clinton's email server in 2016. You wrote in an opinion article, quote, whether through incompetence or willful disregard for security protocol, Hillary Clinton jeopardized national security for personal gain. Why do you think this behavior is horrible when Democrats mishandle classified information, allegedly, but there is nothing wrong at all when Republicans do?
You're missing the key. You're missing the fundamental distinction. She was Secretary of State. President Trump was President of the United States. The Supreme Court decision in Navy versus Egan wasn't about the Secretary of State. The Constitution doesn't say, oh, the Secretary of State can classify and can control access to national security information. It says the President. That is the key distinction. But the left doesn't care. They are so determined to get President Trump. They've been going after him since before he ran, when they took a dossier they knew was false, took it to a secret court, got a warrant, and spied on 4 American citizens associated with his campaign, and it's continued to this day. And anyone with common sense can see that.
Guys, remember, when Jack Smith tells you that there's one set of laws that applies to everyone, he's not only lying, but he's essentially mocking you. He thinks we're all morons. He thinks we haven't been paying attention. Hillary Clinton and Joe Biden broke the law, and nothing happens to them. Right? Bill Clinton did the same thing, and he was president, so he could get away with it, and he could do it, apparently. But why is that precedent? Why is that standard not being used for Trump? Why is it strangely different for Republicans and Democrats? Fortunately, patriots are standing with my father. Patriots are understanding that President Trump is the only guy that can take on this swamp. Look at this video from his arrival in Georgia on Saturday.
Thank you so much. Nice day. Good to see you. Hope you win. We love you.
Hey guys, that's what they're all afraid of. A president that speaks for the people. A president that the people love. They don't want that. If you've watched anything over the last 6 years, you understand that. They could care less. That's why America First is somehow racist and terrible. You can't do that. I mean, we must kowtow and bend to China. Just bend over for them. To the globalists and the people that want to control us. Let's just fold and give up to them. That's what they want. That's why they hate Trump. That's why they fear Trump. And that's why they will do whatever they possibly can to go after Trump. The first post-indictment poll from CBS News was released yesterday. It shows that 61% of Republican primary voters back Trump as the nominee, and just 23% are with DeSantis. Okay, with all of this noise, that's the case. But they want us in a bloody primary battle so that we take all the money that can be used to combat the Democrats cheating their ballot harvesting operations where, people are voting for the Democrat contender that couldn't actually name the Democrat contender. They want to make sure we spend this in a bloody primary so that we are unable and incapable of taking on that Democrat machine. There's even Trump, let's call it Trump haters out there that are saying, you know what, we've had enough. There's too much at stake here. I'm supporting Trump because he's the only guy that will take this on, and they're right. In fact, Trump is doing better against the GOP primary field than Joe Biden is doing against Robert Kennedy and Marianne Williamson, just so we understand where we stand. In the latest poll, Biden's at 58%, and no one's talking about those people as even challengers, unlike all the sort of artificial airtime that they're giving to anyone who will say anything bad against Trump. I'm sure you guys have seen this. This provides an answer for why they are using law enforcement as essentially a campaign strategy in a failing effort to cripple my father and his campaign. They know that Joe Biden can't win the 2024 election against Trump. Every week we learn more about the Biden crime family. The indictment was not coincidentally released the same day we found out that Joe Biden allegedly got $5 million bribe from Burisma. No. Magically, the day that news breaks, Trump indictment, it's totally coincidence, folks, right? There's no such thing as coincidence anymore, folks, and you get it, okay? Joe Biden allegedly got a $5 million bribe from Burisma, where Hunter Biden worked, yet had no knowledge of the business, no ability to speak the language, wasn't required to actually show up for the hundreds of thousands of dollars he made a year. Why exactly was he getting paid? Again, you'd think that these would be questions that people in the media would want to know, that even the Democrats would want to know. I know if it was me, they'd want to know exactly, and yet, nothing. And every week, Biden's cognitive struggles are more and more undeniable. He's a weak candidate, folks. Just like Hillary Clinton was a weak candidate. I guess the difference between them is, you listen to Hillary Clinton and it's easy to hate her. When you listen to Joe Biden, you almost feel bad for him. But that does not mean you let him make the decisions that a president needs to make. Perhaps life and death decisions. You don't leave a guy that's clearly incompetent the nuclear codes. You don't let him make calls that our children and grandchildren will be beholden to for decades. And just like they used the Russia hoax to help Hillary win, they're now using this absurd documents case to rig an election for imbecile Joe Biden. It won't work as long as we stand with President Trump against the deep state. And we're going to get all of that into it in a second when we get to Kash Patel. But before we do that, I want to take a second to thank our brave sponsors who make this show possible. Okay, guys? Let's be honest. It does take guts to support a show like this. It takes balls. We got to say it the right way, because we can say those kinds of things on Rumble without being censored. That's why I want to make sure to take the time to tell you about Goldco and the importance of diversifying to stabilize your portfolio. It's looking like the insanity we saw in 2008 all over again, folks, when millions of Americans watched their savings, their retirements just disappear. We see the warning signs. We see the bank collapses. We see inflation. And more importantly, we see the actions of our leaders. Like, these are not people you'd entrust with anything. So I want you to be prepared. Owning tangible, physical, inflation hedging gold and silver can help stabilize and secure your portfolio. So from precious metal IRAs to direct purchases of gold and silver, Goldco's helped thousands of Americans diversify and protect their retirement savings. So support the companies who support you instead of the woke companies who hate you. Go to donjuniorgold.com to learn more. That's DONJR gold.com and learn more. Just educate yourselves. Check them out. I'll put the link down here, but make sure you give it some diligence, okay? Take the time to learn so that you're not left holding the bag when the idiots in charge end up screwing it up, because it's not looking good right now. And speaking of being prepared, folks, I want to make sure you go check out My Patriot Supply. Economic anxiety, a banking crisis, supply chain shortages, inflation, they're all reasons why you need to be prepared for what's coming next and why you need to invest your family's food security, okay? Take the time to learn about it. It's why I partnered with the great folks at Patriot Supply, where they are the leaders in emergency preparedness. The world is way too unstable to rely on the government to ensure your family's safety and security. Just look what we've been talking about with the gross corruption across our own government. And I want to make sure that if disaster strikes, you and your family are prepared. So go to mypatriotsupply.com/DONJR and stock up on their popular 3-month emergency food kit. When you do, you'll also get $200 off each kit. These food kits will keep everyone in your family sustained and healthy. Again, whether it's for the economic crisis that's coming, whether it's for the nuclear apocalypse that seems to be a real threat for the first time in, I don't know, about 50 years, or just natural disasters that we face all the time. I know we do so here in Florida. Just check it out. Go to preparewithdonjr.com. That's preparewithdonjr.com and enjoy fast and free shipping too. Preparewithdonjr.com. And with that, folks, I want you to really, I think you'll like this. I know our folks really love Cash, but he's the author of a new book, Government Gangsters. He's the former chief at the Defense Department, Cash Patel. Cash, how's it going, buddy? Good to have you on here.
Hey, Don, great to be with you. Thanks for having me back on the show.
So, give us a little breakdown. I mean, I think you have a unique perspective on all of this in that you worked, not only as sort of deputy DNI, director of national intelligence, you understand and had to deal with the deep state stuff. Devin Nunes in Congress was the only guy that got Russia right. Basically 100% of the way. You worked for him during that, but you also worked as a criminal defense attorney in Miami, essentially in the courthouse where all of this is going on. So I just want to get your general reaction to the indictment, what it means for any sense of credibility within our justice system, and what it means for the future of our republic.
Yeah, look, as a former national security prosecutor and public defender in the Southern District of Florida, and we'll get to the prosecutors involved in this case in a minute, but rarely have I ever, if ever, seen an indictment by the government that exonerates the very defendants they have charged. And that's what happened in this case. Put aside your politics. For 2 years, we heard them, DOJ and the leaks through the FBI and the criminal conspirators in the media, Donald Trump is illegally handling classified information left and right in his golf bags, in the swimming pool, in his shoes, at Mar-a-Lago, classified, illegal. So when it's time to man up and go to the grand jury and charge Donald Trump with illegally possessing classified information, do you know what they do? They do not charge him with that. There is a book on the record that says in 1951, classified information became a reality. So that why they didn't charge him with that, we'll get back to it in a second. They reach back 105 years to the National Defense Information element of the Espionage Act, which we used to charge sailors for swiping maps off of boats. But leave that aside. They then say Donald Trump was flaunting classified information around, but he was so reckless that we couldn't charge him with unlawfully possessing classified information. So we went back 55 more years and charged him with possessing stuff that wasn't classified but legal. I don't understand it. It makes absolutely no legal sense. They cannot in one instance say Donald Trump possessed classified information and in the charging document say he did not possess classified information and we did not charge him with that. But what they're doing is a speaking indictment, which is trying to dirty up the defendants in this case by publicizing a one-way document that just dirties them up through the corporate media. And I've never seen something written so diametrically opposing viewpoints in one instance. And I think this judge is going to pick up on it.
Well, so talk about that. I mean, it seems, the left is outraged about a judge who was a Trump appointee, someone who's, taken on some of these things. But, they never seem to have a problem if it's a radical leftist pursuing someone that's their enemy. They're going after this, but, choosing a prosecutor to prosecute this who's literally been reprimanded for essentially misconduct, who wiretaps the opposition. I mean, that's legal 101. I mean, a prosecutor wiretapping the defense to try to figure out their strategy, presumably, that's fine. Using a war crimes prosecutor with its own set of issues, who has a wife who is like a producer of the Michelle Obama documentary. I'm sure Trump's going to get a fair shot here. That's not a problem. That's just, that's justice. That's the way the system works. Talk a little bit about that juxtaposition, because that seems a little bit nuts to me, too.
Yeah, so I was the one that first broke the fact that Karen Gilbert, an AUSA who I tried cases against in Miami when I was a federal public defender, was a 20-year prosecutor down there, is the deputy special counsel to Jack Smith. She's his Weissman. And why is it important? Don't listen to me. Don't listen to you. Go pull the Ali Shagan case from 2009. Karen Gilbert is the head of the narcotics unit at the Miami U.S. Attorney's Office, the #1 prosecutor. And you know what she does? She authorizes an illegal wiretap of the defense attorney talking to the investigator during the prosecution of that case. And forget about reprimands and unethical conduct. The district court judge in that case issued a blistering opinion and was about to throw her out of the Justice Department before what? She was reassigned out of that position and years later promoted through the ranks. And now this same prosecutor is on the team charging Donald J. Trump, while at the same time, I find it ironic, this prosecutor went before a federal judge to break attorney-client privilege. She's got a track record of doing that. And of course, got a DC judge to go along with it. And that's not even getting into Jay Bratt, the guy who signed the indictment, who is now alleged to have dangled a judgeship in front of one of the attorneys of the co-defendant in the Donald J. Trump prosecution. Forget a motion to dismiss. I hope the defense team in this case is riling up pretrial motions for prosecutorial misconduct on both the attorney-client privilege, on the leveraging of a judgeship, and on Karen Gilbert's behavior, because that and that alone would be sufficient to toss the case. But then let's get back to Judge Eileen Cannon. The reason they, quote unquote, forum shop this case out of DC into Miami is for the appearance of neutrality. But remember, Karen Gilbert's a 20-year prosecutor down there. She knows every judge. And the one judge they didn't want to draw is Eileen Cannon. But I think there's more misconduct. In the back of the indictment, there's a one-pager. And there's a series of questions every prosecutor must submit to the court, essentially under oath. One of the questions is there any related cases to this indictment currently ongoing in this district? And they said no. Well, why is that important? Judge Eileen Cannon handled the classified documents case of Mar-a-Lago and the special master. That was the one judge they didn't want to get. They go to the court, they lie about a previous case not being in the jurisdiction because they wanted to get on the wheel and draw some other judge. And you know what happens? A bit of poetic justice. They draw the one judge out of 30 that they didn't want. But there's nothing there about impropriety about the judge. It's only prosecutorial impropriety about Jack Smith's office, the DOJ, and the FBI.
Listen, again, that's clear. How does someone like that even have a law license doing that? I mean, if you wiretap the criminal, the defense, that's not like you would think you'd be disbarred for that. And I guess, you would be if you were, on our side. If you did that, Cash, you'd be disbarred. But She can go on. They reassign her. They make sure she goes back up in the ranks. It sort of feels like the rest of the deep state works that way. Like, you can actually be on the left as long as and get in trouble. You could do the things, and it's not career ending. It's just, it may be a slight hiccup and a delay. I mean, the fact that she even has a law license seems striking to me, isn't it?
Well, I hate to say it, but as a guy who was in government for 16 years, if you want a promotion, screw up. If you want a really big promotion, commit misconduct and you will be rewarded. And it's not even a Democrat or Republican thing. It's an institutionalist thing. Look at guys like Comey, McCabe, Strzok, Barr, Wray, Priestap, and these attorneys and prosecutors. And remember, Jack Smith is not foreign to this type of prosecutorial misconduct. He was the one in charge of DOJ's public integrity section when he charged Governor Bob McDonnell with all those felonies. And the Supreme Court shellacked this guy 8-0 in a reversal, saying that case should never have been brought. It was unlawful to bring. So you have two attorneys running this prosecution and a third who signs this indictment, leveraging judicial appointments, lying about whether or not attorney-client privilege is appropriate to Pierce, and having a track record of prosecutorial misconduct that is grounded in judicial opinion. And these are the people that have been promoted to the top ranks. Unfortunately, it's no surprise. This is what government gangsters do at their finest. They look out for each other, especially when the target is Donald J. Trump.
Yeah, I mean, that's an interesting thing you said, and I imagine you talk about it in your book, Government Gangsters, and all of that. But, that the surest way to get promoted is to conduct misconduct. I mean, I guess that's because the deep state just understands that, hey, if you're willing to do that in any capacity, you'll probably do it to further their interest against that of the American people. I guess that's let's call it a Trump card in D.C., though I don't know if Trump gets you anything in D.C., but, if they know you're willing to do that, you'll do it for them. And I guess that is why they get promoted. Someone who actually plays by the rules, plays by the books, that's probably seen as a negative. And again, I think that's probably why they hate Trump so much.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And I've seen it time and again, not just at the FBI and DOJ, but at DOD, at CIA, at NSA. It doesn't matter what your Republican or Democratic stripe is. It only, especially in the Trump administration, it only mattered whether or not you are going to obfuscate and get in the way of the commander-in-chief's prerogatives and priorities. If you were willing to literally break the law, they were glad handing you up the ladder. They being Milley, they being Esper, they being Gina Haspel, who orchestrated Russiagate as London Station CIA chief. These people have risen through the ranks together, and then they stay together afterwards. Do you know where Rod Rosenstein and Gina Haspel currently make seven-figure dollars? At Chris Wray's old law firm. Do you think that's a coincidence? Why do you think Bill Barr is on his billion-dollar book tour of corruption? Because he let Russiagate happen. No one was prosecuted because he was asleep at the wheel intentionally. And for him to go out there on TV and say that Donald J. Trump is toast, the justice system is toast because you sat there and glorified your own ego and your pocketbook instead of doing the job for accountability. And now look where we are. But they are all shaking each other's hands. Him, Rosenstein, Wray, Garland. That's why all this talk of impeachment, I'm like, look, yeah, okay, it's fun to impeach a president, especially Biden. But what we really need to do is impeach Chris Wray so we can get the corruption information that is at the very crux of the FBI out for the American public, just like Senator Grassley broke today. It's not surprising to me that we have this continued lying from the FBI when it comes to one target and a separate set of rules and a two-tier system of justice when it comes to Donald J. Trump.
Yeah, I'm reading, I'm just sort of looking down onto the comments here that are popping up, and someone actually put down, it sort of sounds just like the mob. And I was like, wow, it's actually 100% right. I mean, that's what they're doing. It sounds like the mob, and yet, you'd prosecute the mob, but these guys can get away with it.
No, it's that's why I call my book Government Gangsters, and people are like, why did it take so long for the government to release it? Because I'm calling out the very mobsters in government that wanted to attack us. You brought up the fact that Devin Nunes was, and I agree, one of the bravest guys who had Russiagate right. I was his chief investigator. Do you know what happened to us? And we didn't find out for 5 years from these same mobsters in government. Rod Rosenstein and Chris Wray authorized unlawfully surveillance against me Devin Nunes is chief investigator. They subpoenaed my records in Congress, my emails, my phone numbers from 2017. And we didn't find out till 2023 when Google called me and said, hey, 5 years has elapsed. We just want to let you know the DOJ and FBI were on your case. And you know why they were doing it? Not because I knew DJT. I had never met the man. I had never spoken to him, because Devin and I dared to put out the truth to the American people. And when we did that, we caused a rift in the FBI and the DOJ's mobsters that were leaving it, these government gangsters. And stay tuned, because in about 2 weeks, I'm going to drop a monster lawsuit against these government gangsters for violating my civil rights and for upending constitutional oversight for political gain to rig a presidential election.
Yeah, listen, I've thought about that myself, right? I mean, you have people, the former head of the Intelligence Committee saying I committed treason. I take that kind of personally as a patriot, but more importantly, again, a crime punishable by death. And you
Right.
heard that for years, and they've seen the actual evidence and all this nonsense, and yet none of it ends up being true. You saw the stuff that came out, 10 days ago about what they were doing during that time. I mean, it never seems to end. I mean, it does certainly seem like, whether it's my father, certainly my civil rights were basically being violated and grossly mishandled, and yet, it's like, minor details. It doesn't really matter. And again, that's the problem. It continues to happen because no one's willing to call it out. I mean, guys like you are, I am, but man, when you look at that against sort of the full weight and force of big tech just being like, whatever, like, fine, it doesn't matter, we're going to censor that, we're going to shut it down. The mainstream media, they won't even talk about it. I mean, they didn't have a hard time covering Adam Schiff calling me a traitor, that he's seen the evidence and saying that I was a part of 3 of the 5 major bombshells that you're going to take down the Trump. All bullshit. Doesn't matter. And now it's like, ho hum, let's just move on. We won't even talk about it. There's no mea culpa. There's no I'm sorry. Not that that's good enough, but they don't even acknowledge the lies that they've been caught in, that
You're
there's
right.
clear and direct evidence of.
You're right. And I think one of the differences between where we were 5 years ago, when you were so wrongfully, unlawfully, and illegally targeted by the likes of Adam Schiff, the DOJ, FBI, and everybody else, is that back then, when we started telling the truth about Russiagate, we were the right-wing conspirators. We were the crazy people in the room, but we were just telling the truth. And now if you stitch it together over time, whether it's Russiagate or Jan 6 or impeachment 1 or Ukraine or Hunter Biden's laptop or the 51 Intel letter or the money that the FBI poured into an FBI investigation to bury Joe Biden's pay-for-play scheme, whatever it is, the American people have now seen that it is a two-tier system of justice at play. And when DJT poignantly says, they're coming after you, I'm in your way, that's not a campaign slogan. That is an everyday reality that is settling in to a middle of America.
Yeah, it's happening all the time. Again, I understand I'm not the upstanding citizen that Hunter Biden is, but I did 50 hours of testimony in front of Congress for anything, and yet all these things that are all lining up, all the policy decisions that seem to be 100% pro-China, China first, America last. We don't even ask the question of, hey, maybe there's something to this. Maybe our policy decisions are being guided by the fact that these guys have something. Now there appears, we learned in breaking news, like right before the show, I don't even know if you had a chance to see it yet, but from Senator Grassley this afternoon, that apparently a foreign national is claiming to have recordings. I hope Hillary Clinton doesn't get to this poor bastard, before he's able to get this information to Senator Grassley and or others, but information about the growing Biden bribery scandal. Again, we understand, what was Hunter Biden doing getting millions from Burisma, or a Russian oligarch that was money laundering, or a $1 billion investment from China? China's many things, but they're not stupid. They don't exactly invest with unknown entities. Their due diligence process is better. They're not looking for, diversification to invest with a crackhead because there's not enough drug addicts represented in their investment portfolios. That's not how it happens, and yet, of course we won't ask any questions about this, but now there may be tape recordings of even Joe Biden actually being involved. This appears to be a massive development, and yet, I don't see, and it only happened an hour or two ago, but I don't see, before I got on here, any of the liberal media even talking about it, or frankly, the conservative media talking about it in the manner that it deserves to be brought up, in a manner that they would have spoken about it, even conservative media, if it was me. because I'd be in jail by now.
You're absolutely right. Look, the legacy media is largely bankrupt. And that's why I'm so glad you have shows like yours on Rumble to lead the charge on actually providing credible reporting to America. Just break this down for a second. When I subpoenaed a dozen times over Chris Wray and Rod Rosenstein during Russiagate for Christopher Steele source reporting, right? You know what they told us? They said, we can't turn this over. People are going to die. You, Devin Nunes, and Kash Patel are going to kill America's relationship with England, and you're going to destroy the intelligence community. But it's the FBI's corruption cover-up network through their confidential human sources that was at play then, and it's at play right now. And this is why Comer needs to stay on the pedal to the metal mode here. We just learned, as you said, 17 recorded conversations. 17 recorded conversations. And do you know what Chris Wray did to that 1023 that he finally relented and gave over to the committee? He redacted that part out of it. It's only because
wait.
Comer...
He took that part out. He didn't let... I mean, a federal prosecutor didn't let people know that there's 17 tapes of Joe Biden in a bribery scheme when we're on the verge of World War... I mean, let's not forget, like, this is... and has to do with Ukraine and Russia and all of these things. Like, we're possibly on the brink of nuclear war. We're making decisions, and they could be totally tainted by the fact that these guys may have more information, and no one cares. I mean, think about the severity of that. I mean, that is legitimately life and death. The Biden administration itself said this is the closest we've been to nuclear war since the Cuban Missile Crisis in the 60s. And like, oh, well, there's 17 tapes of corruption. You know, oh my God. Like, this is a really big deal.
It's worse, and I hate to say it's worse. I mean, Biden's letting China build a spy base in Cuba. That's a whole nother story. But this document has actually had credit and reporting since 2017. So if it were you or me or anything Trump, that would have leaked to the media because it would have rigged a presidential election. Well, then burying that story has rigged multiple presidential elections multiple times over. So here's what has to happen. Everybody that's listening has to call Congress, and don't yell at them. Ask them what is important to you and tell them this 1023 and the 17 recordings that Senator Grassley and Comer have now discovered need to be made public to the world. And the documents need to be made public to the world. I don't need CNN and the New York Times putting it in a footnote of some reporting they do 5 years from now
or
to describe what it is.
Or not at all. Yeah.
Or not at all. Or not at all. Yeah.
Well, yeah. So, hey, guys. If you're watching, I'm looking. There's 12,000 people watching live right now. Many others will see it later on. But just hit the like button right now. That way it'll stay up high in the algorithm. More people will see it. But take the time to send this to some of your friends. Like, they have to see this. And do what Kash is saying, right? Have them call their representatives and ask, because that's exactly what will happen. We've seen that over and over again, right? Like the lies about me, here's the evidence that it's no longer true. It's like, well, it doesn't matter. There's no correction. There's no story about it anymore. They don't like where it's going, so it just disappears. It just goes away. It's as though it never happened. So make sure that people understand that it happened. And you don't have to call and scream at them, but call and find out. Ask them what they're doing about this, because that's a really big deal. These guys are there rigging it. They're hiding information from Congress. They're making sure that nothing will happen. And because there's so many bureaucrats in the deep state working against this, they're going to slow roll every aspect of this. So even if there's guys, whether it's Jim Jordan, whether it's Comer, whether it's any of the guys that are leading some of these things, they're going to try to tap it out in the hopes that we get to 2024 and they can make it disappear, that there's another election cycle. They're going to take everything. You ask for a document. You saw how long it took to get this. It took threats of congressional contempt to get the FBI, the law enforcement wing of our government, our federal law enforcement, to give Congress information that there are tapes of the President of the United States taking bribery money. Like, I mean, you'd think that Congress would want to know that. You'd think The leaders in federal law enforcement would think that that's important enough to even investigate, and yet they don't. So like this stuff, share this podcast, make the calls. It's really easy. You can go on, you can do a quick search and find the offices of your congressman and ask them to look into it, or call the Republicans, because you know the Democrats won't do anything. This could be the biggest story in the world and they'll hide it. But make this an issue. Become vocal about it. The only way we win this, guys, is if we become unafraid and fight out there together. Cash, like any other tips how to do this? Because like the fact that you and I can have this conversation right here and no one else is even doing that, no one's even talking about it, it's not even a news story, they'd love it just to go away. And guess what, guys? If we don't do these things, that's exactly what will happen. It'll just go away. And it'll be business as usual in Washington, D.C. And again, I think that's why the threat of Trump is so great. Like, now that he knows what's going on, now that he knows who the bad guys are, now that he could say, you know what, I'm just going to put Cash in charge of this, they're shitting their pants. And they'll throw him into jail for 450 years. Okay, just so we're clear. Like, you know, almost half a millennium, just to prevent that from happening tells us everything we need to know right now.
Yeah, and if that weren't bad enough, as you said, you know, the things
there's
that we
more,
could do,
Cash? Holy shit.
No, I know. I have no good news today.
Yeah.
We'll have good news next week. We got to get everybody involved first, and I feel like bad news gets everybody triggered and going.
Yeah.
So here's the thing, right? Like you said, congressional constitutional oversight. It's not a Republican or Democratic thing. It's a congressional constitutional oversight thing. It took us nearly 6 months to get one document.
Yeah.
One document. And then we had it multi-layered through redactions, just like the same scam Chris Wray ran back then. And the reason I'm highlighting this is because what else? What else is there, and why is that related to the modus operandi of the current DJT prosecution? You have to ask yourself, why are they wormholing these documents into no man's land for you never to read or read 10 years from now after the elections are over? And with DJT, and the part of the reason I believe they brought this indictment is to wormhole the 40% of the Russiagate conspiracy documents that they never released when Devin and I were running that prosecution. Because now Jack Smith has his hands on them, and he's going to say, no, nothing to see here. I have an ongoing prosecution of the former president of the United States who happens to be running again, so I'm not going to let any of this out. President Trump needs a solid defense team. He doesn't need a law firm. He needs 3 people going after 3 things. 1, the Classified Information Procedures Act. He needs to go in there and hammer for those documents to be made public so he can launch his offense and his exoneration. 2, he needs a national security attorney who knows how to take on these creatures of the deep state so they can get the 1023s and the like out to the world. And 3, he just needs to be the best. He needs the best litigator in the arena to show the American. This will be the most publicized trial in the globe's history. Make no mistake about it. And we have to be able to use that process, not to dismiss the case right away, but to show the American people yet again the prosecutorial corruption that they engaged in just to bring the case, just to rig another presidential election, and to falsely imprison Donald J. Trump. This is what they are good at because of one thing. They think they can get away with it. And then even if they don't get away with it and get caught, they can go become millionaires like Comey and Barr and everybody else, and Rosenstein and company, and write books because they're all in the same club together. And the one man who is breaking the 2-tier system of justice and destroying their opportunity to do so in the future is Donald J. Trump. And that's why he's front and center on the indictment.
Yeah, I mean, we've seen obviously the Joe Biden scandal, the Hillary Clinton, Mike Pence. They all have their own document issues, but nothing happens to them. Like, it's not even, it's like, oh. And then the feds and the National Archives, just whatever they can to destroy Trump. I mean, to me, there's no other solution than it's about exactly what you said, which is about making sure that Trump can't win in 2024. It's about that election. It has nothing to do with the documents.
No, nothing at all. And they will stop at nothing to do so. That is why everyone listening to the show has to make this the priority. Do you want your neighbors, Do you want your parents, do you want your kids prosecuted because they dared to put America first, or go to a Trump rally, or participate in a Trump parade, or even talked about supporting Donald J. Trump? This isn't a popularity contest in high school. I don't care if you like or dislike someone. You have to have the respect for the rule of law that these government gangsters purport to have, but don't, if you want our children to grow up in a community that isn't guided by politics from sun up to sundown. And they spend the nighttime robbing you of your civil liberties and don't tell you about it when they wake up. This is the America we have to fight to win for. And I think the only person that can really do it, I'm obviously biased and people can call me out for it, but I've seen Donald J. I was asked the question on the media, I think it was on Fox and Friends, can President Trump take on this indictment? Can he campaign for office and also have the ability to mount a defense? And I said, let me just give you one day of one instance in the life of President Donald J. Trump. I remember when I was chief of staff, we killed some of the biggest terrorists in the world. We rescued an American hostage. We ended a forever war. We shut down the border, and we seized control of the gangsters trafficking narcotics. And that was a 24-hour period for President Trump. I just happened to be on the receiving end of it. So anyone that thinks that this guy can't take these guys on is flat out wrong. And that narrative, that's what they want, though. Yeah. This trial, when and if it ever occurs, is going to be a 30 to 45 day trial. They want him off the campaign trail for 30 to 45 days. And if it's not here, it's Georgia. If it's not Georgia, it's New York. But that's why I think the only guy who can do it, he can do it. He can do all 3 trials. He can probably do 7 more. Campaign for presidency.
They're going to try to get 7 more. Don't worry. By the time we're done with it, there'll be another 7. But we'll deal with the 3 that we got ongoing right now. But I mean, I guess, listen, I want you to expand a little bit on what you said, because I think it was sort of important. Like, if they can do it to Trump, they can do it to anyone. And I mean, I'm sure if you're MAGA, if you're this, just like if you're a concerned mother at a PTA meeting that voices their opinions, about not wanting your children indoctrinated with their fucking trans bullshit, they'll put you on a terror list. They've done that. They've shown that. People who are actual terrorists, that's different. As long as you're woke, like, that's fine. You're okay. We're not going to go after you. But tell us a little bit about the Espionage Act, because it feels like that's the next thing they're going to use to go after our people. They're going to actually use that to go after patriotic Americans, like they did, the Patriot Act and all of these other things that are, they seem so great. And on paper, it sounds wonderful until you read it and you're like, wait. Like, this seems like they're going to use it to and weaponize it against American citizens. The Espionage Act, and how it seems to be so broad that it could be weaponized in really dangerous ways against the American people. And then you have, the Presidential Records Act that, the Bill Clinton sock drawer is, I'm sure, much more secure than Donald Trump's vault at Mar-a-Lago, but, minor details. But talk about that, because, you talked about, Trump's in the way of them going after you. They're going after you already, but they're showing that they don't care anymore. They'll put you on a watch list for things that 5 years ago would have been like every American would have gone before the left lost their minds, and there were 9,476 genders. And if you questioned biology and science, you're now a terrorist. As long as it's not COVID science, then they can make up shit however they want, and you can't question that. But just the basic decency that they're going after and weaponizing in America, the radical left, they've lost their minds. This stuff's going to be weaponized against Americans very quickly and very rapidly. Talk a little bit about that, because it feels like, again, Patriot Act, Espionage Act, who won't be a spy in the eyes of the left? Basically anyone who doesn't agree with 100% of every aspect of every fucking insane platform they come up with. That seems really scary to me right now. And if we haven't already crossed the Rubicon, we're right there.
You're absolutely right. Look, and that's the ultimate downfall of a constitutional republic, is when you have an overcorrection in government to say, okay, we have to totally dismantle the FBI, we have to totally dismantle the DOJ and never have one again. I disagree with that. I think they need a complete and total overhaul. But and when you have a year like this, when FISA 702 is up for renewal, when Espionage Act authorities are up for renewal, I understand why Americans, so many in Congress, are saying absolutely not. Because now we are robbing of ourselves of the very tools we utilized correctly in the Trump administration to manhunt terrorists, to put down the bad guys, to end wars, to win on the global stage diplomatically, so that America first priorities carried the day, because we used to be the greatest nation on planet Earth till Joe Biden took the helm at the White House. And so when you have the Espionage Act as an example of, like, you know, how you're saying, Don, how can it be utilized against you? Just look at what they did. They took an act that was utilized to basically prosecute sailors who stole maps off ships and boats and said, you, President Trump, are now guilty, by the way, of the thing we gave Hillary Clinton a pass on. Remember, James Comey and the DOJ came out and set the standard for whether or not someone could be guilty under the National Defense Information portion of the Espionage Act. They said, even though Hillary Clinton sent knowingly 36 emails that were actually classified to Jake Sullivan and the now director of the CIA. Nothing happened to them, by the way. They got confirmed, and most of the Republicans voted for them, even though they themselves broke the law. They said that Hillary did not possess the intent standard to meet a prosecution under that statute, which is the same statute they are now saying all of a sudden Donald Trump does. And whether or not it's Trump or somebody else, what you have highlighted is brilliant. They are showing you how the same statute can be applied differently in a two-tier system of justice just because you disagree with the way they think or the leadership you want to see running this country or your government, which takes me to my next point. This can be pretty harsh. State attorney generals in Republican states have failed across the board to prosecute people who have committed this type of treasonous, conspiratorial behavior across America. And we've called a couple of them, and they've said, no, it's a federal thing. Do you think the Democrats would let it be a federal thing if the Republicans were in power? Look at what they're doing in Georgia. Look at what they're doing in New York. Look at what they're doing in Arizona and my home state of Nevada and everywhere else. And every Republican state AG that should be acting has failed to act. Are you telling me these crimes don't touch your states? Are you telling me there's no voting bloc of the U.S. electorate that presides in your jurisdictions and you can't bring these crimes? They don't want to challenge them because most of them are as big a problem as the deep state is themselves because they're in it.
Yeah, I think that's right. I mean, beyond that, I think, again, it's what Trump did differently. He was fine fighting. Again, one guy goes out there and fights by himself, and they'll take him out. They've shown they could take out the most powerful man in the world, the leader of the free world and all that. They take him out and cancel him. If we don't get every American behind this, every independent, I mean, the Democrats, you'd think that even some of them, especially based on sort of the historical view of the Democrat Party, would be against this. But I guess, right now the trans movement controls that party entirely. And as long as if they're grooming our children, we can't talk about anything else. So, but that does seem to be crazy that Republicans themselves are so afraid to play the same game that the Democrats are playing. They do it every day. Again, mothers are domestic terrorists for questioning what teachers are indoctrinating our children with. Think of how insane that is. Think of what a Democrat in like the 90s, early 2000s, certainly the 70s and 80s would say about that. And yet, today it doesn't matter. So we're playing two different games. We're playing T-ball while they're playing Major League hardball, and we wonder why we get our asses kicked all the time. It's lunacy, but I think we got to just get out. We got to call those guys out too. Like, we got to call balls and strikes. I try to do that as best I can. When our side is screwing up, we got to say it. But like, you're telling me that, Hunter Biden wasn't doing some of these things in jurisdictions where there's Republican AGs that could actually look into it and accelerate the process. Arkansas, there's a lot of states I'm sure that are overlapping, but we got to be looking at this stuff, and they don't. And it seems like it's such a no-brainer, especially in some of these heavily red states. They're not even willing to look at it because, it's too political. It's like, have you not been watching? Like, you think it's not going to happen to you. It's like when Ron DeSantis says, well, weaponization of our government, it's not that serious. Oh, really, Ron? Like, one day if you're ever the big guy, and, unfortunately, I don't know that can happen now because of basically the stance that you've taken, which this isn't that big a deal. They're going to do it to you. and they're going to kick your ass with it, and they're going to come after your family personally, and they'll find a way to destroy you. But, I guess it's not that big a deal as long as they're taking out the people on your side that, actually allowed you to become the governor of a state. But, hey, now it's different. We're going to take them out in a primary and pretend it's not a big deal. That's a dangerous game we're playing.
It is. And I'm glad that so many people have decided to mount oppositions to President Trump. And this is why. Part of the reason that we were crippled in the first administration is, and it's not a fault of the Trump administration, they relied on career government officials to, do career government work. They just didn't know that they would be bamboozled by these officials because they were so full of hatred for an animosity for Donald Trump that they would willing to take down the republic for it. But now that we have all these people running and all the folks that are running for Ron DeSantis or Scott or whoever, now we know who's in and now we know who's out. So when Donald Trump wins in 2024 and he's in the White House in 2025, we have lists. And now it's no more conjecture and it's no more arguments. People have made lines in the sand and made decisions. And for me, from my perspective, the people that are waffling, the state attorney generals that are saying, I'm being ambivalent, and the guys and gals that used to serve DJT who aren't publicly out there campaigning for him, you're out. Yeah. We're not waiting for you to jump back in after your lead horse loses. And that's what we have to make sure America understands. Personnel is the key to the next administration's success, beyond, of course, Donald J. Trump. But that's what we have to do. We've got the bench. We can't bring in the ambivalent folks like Rosenstein, Wray, and Barr ever again. We have to bring in great America warriors like Rick Grenell, like Johnny Ratcliffe, like Devin Nunes, and so many other folks that are out there across the spectrum.
And now we know, and that's something we didn't know in 15 and 16. I mean, we were outsiders from New York. That was a big enough threat. I'm sure they played the same games for Hillary that they did for Biden. The difference is they just assumed they didn't need to play as hard. They weaponized COVID. But, I mean, I think that's the one thing. Like, I sort of assumed incorrectly, very incorrectly, that, like, hey, if they're working in government, they must love our country. Like, no. They love power. They love enriching themselves and their cronies. They're getting the kickbacks there. They end up on the boards the second they leave. You can lie before Congress like so many of the names that you listed earlier. And, not only are they not penalized, they're given like contributorship roles at CNN. They're given 7-figure jobs at the law firm that their buddy who's now in charge did. Like, they should be in jail. Those are the people that are actually committing treason against our country. And not only is there not a consequences, there are rewards. Big rewards, and that should scare all of us.
Actually, that brings up a great point. It was on Truth Social the other week. Somebody had asked, what can we do now to set up a successful Trump presidency for accountability? Because that's what everybody is missing right now, actual accountability, not false targeting, but actual accountability. So Congress, I know they're listening, and I know your audience has massive influence there. We need to subpoena methodically individuals who lied before in the past and got away with it now. We need to, and I put up a big list, starting with Comey, going to Clapper Brennan, going back to Strzok, Page, Priestap, going to Barr, going to Wray, and everybody, and lock their testimony in this year and next year. Lock it in. Because these government gangsters, what they do is lie and lie again because they think they'll get away with it. And here's the kicker, though. When Donald J. Trump wins in November 24, come January of 2025, we prosecute all these guys for lying to Congress, which is a felony punishable by 5 years in prison. We can have our accountability. It may not be in the exact form we want it, but Congress has got to start hauling these guys in under oath.
Yeah, I love that, because I don't think you can actually divorce, Russiagate and Crossfire Hurricane from what we're seeing play out now. I mean, is there a sense that all roads sort of lead back to that? It's sort of like all the players in that, all the people who lied in that, are the people that seem to be brought into this to be weaponized against. It's like they found the corrupt guys that are willing to break the law, the guys that have no decency, that have no moral compass. They're recycling them in this. If it didn't work there, we're going to put the same team on then. If it's not the exact person, you have the Rod Rosenstein character and you have the Andrew Weissman character play out. And it's like you look back and the records are the same. The people with no decency, no morality. So, I mean, does it all tie back? Are they just recycling the same group of bad actors? Because, they'll do whatever it takes and they could care less about anything other than hurting Donald Trump. Not results, but as long as the results are that they hurt Donald Trump.
That's literally it. You just stole one of the biggest chapters out of my book, Government Gangsters, that I can now talk about because the federal government finally yielded in federal court and released my manuscript. But I've said for years, all roads lead back to Russiagate. And in the beginning, people thought I was biased because I was a chief investigator and that's what I knew really well. But you've outlined it brilliantly. You have said what I have said this entire time. These people are institutionalists that are all tied together. Let me give you an example. Do you remember Samuel Berger, the guy who literally went into the National Archives and stuffed 9/11 documents in his pants and walked out the door with them and then lit them on fire? Hang on a second. Somebody tell me that's not a felony, but okay, whatever. Let's go to the DOJ. The head of the criminal division at the DOJ that decided not to charge Samuel Berger with a felony and let him plead to a misdemeanor. Do you know who that was? Christopher Wray was the head of the DOJ criminal division who made the decision to give this guy a get out of jail free card. All roads lead back to Russiagate. It's literally a chapter in my book. Now everybody's going to give Don Jr. credit for it. Damn it!
No, listen, I'm giving you full credit. I'm just like, man, listen. I may not be but eventually you figure out, like, hey, does it seem like it's a coincidence that all of this shit happens? It's always the same players. I mean, with that said, what can House Republicans do from here? Obviously they're doing some things. They're going to be stonewalled, but. You were one of the guys that really unraveled Russiagate. You saw what they threw at you and Devin. They were spying on you. Much more, how intelligence is manipulated. What should House Republicans be doing now? What more should they be doing than what they're supposedly doing right now? Because again, we know they're not playing decently. The FBI is trying to withhold information, and it takes a threat of contempt of Congress. Well, what about the things they don't know? What about the things that are just going to delay or just pretend like they don't exist? I mean, what are the questions that the House Republicans need to be asking that they're not currently asking to make sure that they're like, now we can't get away with not showing it to them? Because I'm sure there's plenty more, but what don't we know? What don't House Republicans know that they should know? What should they be asking?
There's two things. One, on the investigatory steps that they already have out there. Stop being nice. Why are you sending a letter and then making a request and then giving them a month? And then a month later, you send another letter and you say sternly, oh, I'm really going to hold you in contempt this time, or issue the subpoenas out of the gate. Look at what the January 6th committee did. I was the first guy subpoenaed by the January 6th committee. It cost me $255,000. They didn't write me a letter. They didn't ask me to come in and testify. They didn't ask me to cooperate. This is the powers that Congress have. And this Republican leadership is being too polite. Forget that. We are not in a time period of the 1980s when that used to fly. So skip all that. Go right to the compulsory process and subpoenas. But here's the bigger step that I have not seen Republicans take. And we took it once during Russiagate because I had to convince Paul Ryan to let me do it because he was the Speaker of the House and he's the only one that can authorize it. You take their money. Yeah. You take their money. And I'm not saying you bankrupt the federal government agencies and bureaucracies, but when Chris Wray wants 10 new motorized Escalades, you stop it. When he wants a new FBI headquarters building costing $10 billion, you take his taxpayer dollars. There's a fencing program in Congress. There's a budgeting program. And overnight, the documents start pouring in. The one time we did it, the 302s we got were of Chris Wray, Bruce Orr, and we broke the Russiagate investigations back. And they must yield to that because they cannot operate without their toys. And Chris Wray can't operate without his government-funded G5 jet that he hops on to run away from Congress when he's in jeopardy of being held in contempt. When you seize those taxpayer dollars and don't let them pay confidential human sources millions of dollars to rig presidential elections, then you can make an impact. There should be a bill on the House floor immediately seizing the confidential human source funding for corrupt actors at the FBI, whoever signed off on it, and that budget should be chopped in half until they restore the credibility of the FBI. Now, that can't happen until Donald Trump's back in the White House, but at least until then, We can get the FBI to heal, and more importantly, we can get the documents. That's the win. Documents, 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 documents. That's the win. That's how we get them.
Hey, so I have a little bit of audio problem. I lost the last of that, Cash, but I think that's right. I mean, we're coming up on the appropriations component of this, and that's where we got to hammer it. I mean, we got to play the same game. We got to be going after the money. If we control the money, we can control that. We can stop funding the nonsense, and we're going to make them answer to this. The FBI doesn't need a brand new headquarters. You know what? Fuck you. If you want a headquarters, like, we expect you to be able to give us the documents that we're requesting as Congress, as a governing body in the United States. That doesn't seem like it's too much to ask.
No, it's not. And I got one more thing. The Hoover building that occupies downtown Washington, we can make this an example. I'm not saying fire everybody in there. I'm saying redeploy 25% of the entire FBI workforce that works in that building and get them to go chase criminals across the country. Take out bank robbers and rapists and sex offenders and murderers.
They're not interested in that, Cash. They're looking for people who, don't put pronouns in their bios. That's the real threat to democracy. That's the human rights issue of our time, according to Joe Biden and these clowns. I mean, that's the problem. That's what they're focused on. The people, look at all the people who've committed actual heinous crimes. It's like, well, we were watching them, but we were a little distracted because your grandmother was within 1,000 miles of D.C. on January 6th. I mean, that's true. They're doing that. Those people got to knock on the door. The actual terrorists, like, I don't know, well, he's a minority. We can't investigate him even if we have credible proof that he's actually doing something, because that would not be politically correct. I mean, it's insane.
No, you're right. And that's why I think one of Donald Trump's first acts should be to redeploy all those people outside of D.C. and close the Hoover building on day one and reopen it the next day as a museum of the deep state and let every American walk the halls for free to know how the FBI rigged presidential elections and robbed us of justice. You need 25 folks in D.C. to run the FBI. And the same thing goes for DOJ and every single other agency out there. You don't need 10,000 people per agency in Washington, D.C. We have seen over years how that has eroded justice and the American intelligence community and the defense of our nation. When you redeploy these people who sign up to actually serve, the majority of them, not the leadership, and you get them out there in collecting intelligence on Al-Qaeda and terrorists and American hostages, and you get them redeployed to the southern border, and you get them chasing criminals, and you get them putting down child sex predators, then America is safer and America is winning. We can do that at every single agency and department.
Yeah, they could also track down the 2,000 mules that were, cheating in elections and stuff like that, but they're not interested in that because they got the results that they want. One of our viewers asked, are you wearing your Punisher socks, Cash?
I'm going sock free today.
Socks free,
but don't tell anybody.
Yeah.
I had to make it.
But I guess it all comes down to the sort of all old notion, right? The Saul Alinsky rules for radicals, like accuse them of doing what you're doing. And it comes down to that. Like, the Democrats accuse everyone else of doing exactly what they're doing themselves. They then are unable to let the government investigate that and run with it. And if the roles were reversed, would Adam Schiff out here be having a meltdown after about election interference? Of course he would, and he'd be given credence. But nothing would come from it because, again, it's against Trump.
Yeah, that's I mean, the takeaway message for me when I go around the country and when I talk to DJT too, I tell him, sir, look, one of the central tenets of the campaign, in my opinion, should be the two-tier system of justice, because now the middle to 8 to 10% of that voting bloc that may have voted the other way is starting to realize that, hey, those guys weren't lying. The media I was watching was lying, and it's not the I told you so moment. Now's the moment to go out there and say, look, we can work together to restore the country to a constitutional republic, to remove a two-tier system of justice, and to make sure our intelligence operatives aren't chasing down our kids and our parents because they believe in a certain reading material or not, or want to go to school here. Yeah. And that, to me, is the win. I believe they're already starting to turn. Your show is so wildly popular, and I think it's only in its third month, because the cable news system is cratering. And it's not because personalities are getting fired left and right. That's part of it. But it's because the legacy media has been proven to be the criminal conspirators of the government gangsters. Remember, all the stuff we've talked about on your show,
Yeah.
All the bad that Ray and Garland and all them have done, and Schiff and company, cannot happen without the legacy media. And they've been in on it since day one. So we've also called them to court. And now the American public is saying, okay, hang on, you guys might actually be right. And if all of these things, Russiagate, Jan 6th, impeachment 1, impeachment 2, 51 intel letter, Hunter Biden's laptop, Biden classified documents case, FBI corruption, have all been true, what else are they doing? And that's the scarier part.
Yeah.
If you think the Democratic Party and these people in the DOJ and FBI haven't ginned up the next 10 versions of the Trump indictment to rig a presidential election going forward, you have been asleep for the last decade. Yeah. They have already done it. They are just hoping we don't catch them in real time. But this time we must.
So, tell us a little bit more about your book. I mean, you were on this show, I think it was like first or second week when we did it.
Yeah.
And you were having a book coming out then, but then the Biden administration, they literally tried shutting it down because of all the things that you reveal in Government Gangsters. Tell us a little bit about that. The government was stonewalling the release. It's now apparently coming out, so I think we're ready for it. Where can people find it, etc.?
Governmentgangsters.com, governmentgangsters.com. I'm doing signed copies and personalized copies in Amazon. You can get it there as well. But look, what happened was when you're a government employee and you write a book, you have to submit it back to the government for review. I agree with that process. Usually takes about 3 months. No big deal. I was in month 8 of review. They refused. I sued them in federal court. I sued the United States government to release a book on how to cure corruption in the federal government. I learned through that suit that they sent my book to 9 agencies and departments, which is unheard of. Yeah. Everyone from DOD to CIA to FBI to NSA to all these other places. And after a brutal campaign where they didn't want this book out, because as Donald Trump put on Truth Social, Government Gangsters is the roadmap to winning back 2024 and creating our agencies and departments that go back to serving the American people. That's the whole point. I call out every gangster by name, Republican or Democrat, but more importantly, how we fix every agency and department, some of which we've discussed today. And so they finally yielded. And the funny thing was, Bannon was like, hey, your book's 250 pages. It's going to be 240 pages of redactions.
Yeah.
Do you know after 8+ months how many redactions they came back with? 9. 9 in less than 10 sentences of less than 10 paragraphs. 9. And that goes to show you that they didn't want the book out. They wanted it to use it as an excuse not to release the book. Yeah. But it's coming out. Should hit shelves in August. Governmentgangsters.com on pre-sale right now. There's got to be a reason these guys didn't want you to read it. And the cool thing is now I can finally start talking about it and releasing chapters as we get closer to release date.
Well, I'm super psyched about that, Cash. Great to have you as always. Guys, go check it out. Governmentgangsters.com. Learn about it, talk about it, just like this, like it, share it, make sure your friends understand, because if we get together, if we become unafraid, if we collectively go after these people and call it out, they won't have a choice but to listen to us. But if it's me, if it's Cash, even DJT, just out there by ourselves on our own, they can cancel us. They can shut us down. They can make sure that we never get to the root cause and be able to come up with a solution. And guys, we're at that point where, man, if we don't fix this thing soon, it's over forever and there's no coming back. So guys, again, make sure, share this podcast so people can find out, what we're talking about here, that people can learn about Cash's book as well. Thank you for doing that. Thank you guys for the support. It means the absolute world to us. It's because of people like you that we have the ability to get this out there so that others can learn from it. Cash, thanks as always for being a guest and just for just continuing in the fight. It's just absolutely awesome. Go follow Cash on Truth Social as well. It's just at Cash. He's done a great job there, and you can learn more about everything that's going on and stay in tune. Guys, also don't forget to check me out. The guys going over to Locals, I'll do my Ask Me Anything right now. And also be sure to check out our sponsors and give them a shot. So I want to make sure you guys take a second to learn about Goldco, to learn about the diversification in your portfolio. We've seen the craziness. It's looking like '08 again. You see the banking crisis, the banks folding, owning tangible physical gold and silver can help stabilize that and protect you from the insanity that's going on. Goldco has the guts to support a show like this, so rather than supporting woke companies, support the companies that support you. Go to donjrgold.com to learn more. That's Don Jr., DONJR gold.com to learn more. And again, speaking of being prepared, go check out My Patriot Supply. These guys have everything you need for the crisis, whether it's because of the banking crisis, the inflation crisis, or honestly, just simple natural disasters. These folks can have you prepared to take care of your family if it all goes wrong. That's why I partnered with the folks at My Patriot Supply, because they're the leaders in emergency preparedness. And I want to make sure that if a disaster strikes one way or the other, you are prepared. So when you go, check them out. You'll get $200 off each of these food kits. They'll keep everyone in your family sustained and healthy. So do this now. Go to prepare, Prepare with DONJR.com. That's prepare with DonJr.com. Enjoy fast, free shipping. Again, prepare with DonJr.com. Thanks again to Kash Patel. Thanks to all you guys for the support, and I will see you on Thursday. If you're on Locals, go over there, check me out. I'll do the Ask Me Anything on all things as it relates to the latest indictment, and I imagine we'll have a lot more news for you guys on Thursday. So tune in then, and I look forward to seeing you guys then. You're the best. Thanks.